Okay, so yes, BREATH stands for Borders and Regions Airways Training Hub. And I'd like to just say the training aspect is really one of the most important aspects of the project, and we'll be talking a bit more about that later on. The partners in the project are Dundalk Institute of Technology, Queen's University of Belfast, and the University of the West of Scotland, as well as some industrial partners as well that will be highlighted during the presentations. The original funding from SUPB was 7.7 million euros, and that includes the match funding from the two departments. There's also some cash contributions from the academic partners, and we actually then applied for additional funding and were successful with that. So the total funding for the project comes to 8.9 million euros, which is rather a lot of money to have to manage, but I must say we've enjoyed it. Now this shows where we fit in to INTERREG. We went in under the investment priority 1A and under the health and life sciences. And the region, the eligible region, includes Northern Ireland, the border counties of Ireland and the west of Scotland. Now, we were aware that COPD was a very, very important disease in the area. And actually, it's pretty stunning when you look at the map of Northern Ireland and Scotland. You can see the distribution of COPD, and you can see that it maps onto the INTERREG eligible region very well. Ireland isn't on this map simply because it was provided by the British Lung Foundation, but actually we can see that when we do look at the distribution in Ireland, the border counties, particularly Donegal, are severely affected by COPD. And that in itself doesn't tell the whole story, because when we look at the incidence of COPD in the developed countries, the OECD countries, we see rather surprisingly that Ireland actually heads the list. So COPD is a really important problem in Ireland. And you can see also that the UK are above the average there on the graph as well. And in fact, there is no breakdown there for Scotland, but if there was, they would be well up the table towards where Ireland is as well. So it's a very, very significant disorder within the INTERREG eligible region. So the next thing is, what is COPD? COPD stands for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And it's really a term that encompasses what we used to call emphysema and chronic bronchitis, which are two aspects of COPD. And this causes chronic airflow limitation. And all these symptoms of breathlessness, barrel chest, chronic cough, wheeziness, multiple chest infections, severely reduced exercise tolerance, and a very poor quality of life. And eventually it can lead actually to damage to the right side of the heart and cause cor pulmonale. Now, COPD is also a very severe global problem. There are nearly 400 million people in the world who suffer from COPD. 30 million of those are in Europe. And COPD is the third greatest killer in the world. There are about 3 million deaths roughly every year from COPD. And when we put that into context, we think of COVID-19 pandemic killing 3 million people worldwide. COPD does this every year, decade after decade. So it's a very, very serious problem. It's also a very costly problem. The direct healthcare costs in the EU are sitting there at 38.5 billion per year. In the UK, that's approaching 1 billion, 800 million, and in Ireland, 350 million. But we should point out that these are just the direct healthcare costs. They don't include GP costs or care in the community, and they don't include all the other costly aspects of COPD, such as days missed from work and carers missing days from work. So it's estimated that the burden across the EU for COPD is about 141 billion euros every year. So now I'd like to sort of say how our team fits together and how we're fitted to tackle COPD. So first of all, I mentioned the airways shown here. You can see the bronchus here. And the airways, the tubes that take the air in and out of the lungs, are surrounded by a layer of smooth muscle cells. In COPD, that layer of smooth muscle is thickened and the muscle is hypercontractile. And this is the effect of constricting the airways and limiting airflow. The inside of the tubes are lined with an epithelial cell layer, and the role of that is to produce mucus and to keep the airways clear. The mucus traps bacteria and other foreign material, and there's a system for wafting this up and getting rid of it and keeping the airways clean. In COPD, the epithelial cells produce too much mucus and it's too thick, and this has the effect of clogging the airways and increasing the obstructive problem. And underlying these two problems that I've highlighted is a process of inflammation. So we have the smooth muscle, the epithelium, and the inflammation. Now, the breath team has a dedicated smooth muscle research centre in Dundalk Institute of Technology with over 100 years' experience in smooth muscle research. And they're particularly interested in ion channels and the electrophysiology of smooth muscle. And many of our group are here today, obviously. As far as the epithelium goes, it's the School of Pharmacy and Medicine in Queen's University where this expertise lies. And also they provide the clinical interface. And the individuals that lead this are shown here. We have Professor Lorraine Martin on the right there, who's the lead in Queen's. We have Dr. Fionnuala Lundy, who's here today as well, who's a PI on the programme. And we have Professor Lorcan McGarvey, who's the clinical lead. He's a respiratory physician and Professor of Medicine in Queen's University. And then we have the Centre for Musculoskeletal Science in the University of the West of Scotland. They have expertise in inflammation, and their group also study arthritis, but their skills are transferable over to the inflammatory processes in COPD as well. And they're shown here, led by the tall one at the back, Professor John Lockhart, who you'll be hearing from later on. So the objectives of breath then were to, first of all, identify novel diagnostics and therapeutic targets to treat COPD. There were also the ambition to set up a world-class training program to train the next generation of researchers within the region, and to develop a cross-border innovative research hub. And finally, to achieve a critical mass that would impact upon the region. Not as part of the outputs, but also very important, where we said that we would increase public awareness of COPD through a programme of public engagement, and that the programme would become self-sustaining by continual development of clinical and industrial links. So let's look then at our achievements over the 5 years. I'll be coming back to this list on and off, but I want to start out by looking at our outputs versus targets, just very, very briefly. So this table shows our main outputs related to our targets. We said that we would produce a certain number of publications over the period, and that added up to 48 cross-border and inter-regional papers with cross-border and inter-regional authorship. We've already exceeded that target there. We're above it. And there are far more publications to come because there's always a lag between doing the research and getting the papers published. So we anticipate probably another maybe 15 or so papers on top of that number. We also then said we would train 22 young researchers, and that equated to 89.5 researcher years. We have currently exceeded that target. We're sitting now above that. mainly actually because of several things. Some money was repurposed to train additional people, but also our industrial partners have postdoctoral researchers placed in their at their locations, and they contribute to these numbers as well. So, and that's still running until the end of June, so those numbers will actually go up. Then, industries receiving support. We said we would collaborate with 5 industries initially. We've exceeded that with 8. And in terms of industries that actually receive financial support, our target was 2, and we've exceeded that currently with 3. We'll be coming back to our industrial relations. Lorraine Martin's going to give a whole talk on that there, so you'll hear much more detail about those projects. So training and career progression then, and this is the bit of the talk that I have most pleasure actually in getting across. This shows a photograph from our launch event, and most of these people are here today. The people in the grey t-shirts are the young researchers. There's actually only one missing there. There are 22 people there, all with grey t-shirts, and they've all progressed in their careers since that day back in 2017. We'll be hearing more from them, but I'd like to just outline where some of them have gone over the next few slides. First of all, we've got Ruth Matthews here, or Dr. Ruth Matthews, I should say, and she has progressed to LinkedIn, where she's an insights analyst. And Ruth will be telling us all later on more about her experiences with breath and how it helped her progress into that career. We've also got Tulene there in the middle, and she's actually a postdoctoral research scientist, worked on a Tufts fellowship in Dundalk Institute of Technology. Shruti Kulkarni has got a job as a scientific writer in India. And good news for Shruti, because she did her PhD Viva this morning and successfully defended her PhD. So as of lunchtime, she's now Dr. Kulkarni as well. Okay, the next group of students are QUB students. So Nicola Rowe has got a job in Lilly. Gillian Kelly-Robinson, she's project leader in Axis Bio, which were a company that we had some collaboration with at the beginning of the project. And Emma Carroll has progressed as a postdoctoral research fellow to FION, one of our industrial partners. Next we have Leanna Morgan, who's an assistant lecturer now in DKT. Mark Thomas, who's a manager of technical application specialists in Thermo Fisher. And Kimberly Black, who will be coming in on video link to tell us again about her experiences. She's a research scientist in Sartorius. Then we have Orla Dunn, who's a postdoctoral fellow at Queen's University. And as you'll see later on, they certainly weren't going to let her go. We have Rabab, who's a postdoctoral fellow now in DCU, and Kirsty McCallum, who's a digital accounts manager, again with Sartorius. We've got now Stephen Carson from Queen's, and he's a still there as a research assistant. We have Mary Balo, a UWS student, who's now study manager at Sartorius, and a postdoc, Dr. Lisa Douglas, who's still a postdoc at Queen's, but in a different role, now funded by Boston Pharmaceuticals. And the final slide of this series shows 5 more of our postdocs here. There's Eamon Bradley, who's moved on to the Northern Ireland Civil Service. Nicholas Mullins, who's lecturing now in Dundalk. James Ryhill, who we'll hear from later on, who's working between Queen's and Almac. And then there's Joanna Brzezinska, I think the pronunciation of that is. I only heard from her the other day, but she's just been awarded a higher degree than a PhD from a Polish university, and they have now offered her a tenure track position as an assistant professor. So highly successful for Joanna. Okay, I'd like to now move on down the list to research impact. Now it's early days yet for this, for the Breath project, but we have actually had some early successes in this regard. There's a paper published there just at the end of last year, First author on it is Tulane, who's one of our PhD students and now postdoc with us in Dundalk. This has cross-border authorship with Queen's University, and we made important discoveries about the way acetylcholine stimulates the smooth muscle cells to contract in the airways. And this actually did receive some press attention when we published it. You see that we have the headline there from Research Alert by the American Physiological Society. Researchers unexpectedly identify potential causes of asthma and COPD. We're rather pleased with that headline. And also points out that we have shown the potential for drugs that were formerly thought to be detrimental in COPD might actually be useful for treating COPD, at least in principle. This was also the subject of an editorial by Professor Sean Ward from the University of Nevada, where he described it as an outstanding study. In another publication in PNAS, which is Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in the USA, we published the fact that this protein, Lingo-1, is a novel regulatory subunit of a channel that we were studying in airway smooth muscle, the BK channel. And Lingo has a big effect on the BK channel when it's co-expressed and really suppresses the channel. And this has implications, certainly for airways, but also it had a spin-off where it became obvious that it was really important for some neurological disorders, such as physiological tremor and Parkinson's disease. And this actually made the general press in terms of headlines. Groundbreaking international research, said the Irish Independent. It was also picked up by the Irish Mirror. There was a radio interview by Professor Mark Hollywood, who was invited to talk about that aspect of the project. And various other publications also picked this up. So the next thing, I'm going to just say a few words about industry engagement, not too much because Lorraine's going to fill out all the details later on, but just one or two things to mention at this stage. We set out to collaborate with 5 companies, and 2 of these would receive funding from Breath. We exceeded that target, but not in the way that we anticipated, because if you look at the actual list, you see the people that we do actually provide some funding to: Almac Discovery, Phion Therapeutics, and Omnispirant. They're all different from the ones that were on the original list. And in fact, the only remaining companies that were on the original list are Axis Bioservices and Raptor Photonics. So how and why are the 2 lists so different? Well, I would say that this was probably the most challenging aspect of Breath, the industrial collaborations. And this is for various reasons. It can be a change of CEO with the company. It can be a buyover of the company by another company. It can just be a change of policy or just a change of heart. So there are many things that affect industrial collaborations with academics. But we're lucky that we have now 3 fantastic funded partnerships going that go to the end of June. And hopefully we will be able to extend those on other funding beyond that. And we also have active collaborations with those other companies too on a non-funded basis. Overall, we've collaborated or interacted with over 18 companies, and all their logos are there. And some of those actually provided training for Breath, and Lorraine will detail that much more in the next presentation. The next thing then is public engagement. And again, I'm not going to say too much about this because John's entire talk is about this, but I just want to give a very brief overview by way of introducing John's talk later on. We've actively engaged with schools. John has been very instrumental in that, in reaching over 5,000 school kids. We also have interacted with patient groups, and we're going to hear from one of those patients after John's talk. There have been quite a lot of political interactions, especially with the Scottish Parliament. So we see Emma Harper here, who we're delighted to hear from in person today. She will also provide a presentation. We visited the European Parliament, you see down in the bottom right here. And we met, there's Shruti, who I was talking about, who just got her PhD. That's her meeting Michel Barnier at the All-Ireland dialogue on Brexit in DKT. So there's been a lot of public engagement, and as I say, John will highlight that much more. Finally, Breath has received several awards. First of all, there have been overall rewards for the project itself. We received the Northern Ireland Healthcare Award for Best Asthma Stroke COPD project in 2018. And this shows the dinner in the Europa Hotel where the prize was awarded. We also received the Queen's University Vice-Chancellor's Research Prize for Research Culture. And the research culture reflected the collaborative nature of the project and the interaction of the partners. There have also been lots of individual awards for the individual students and staff working on the project. There's a whole list there. I'm not going to read it all out. I think the purpose of putting it there is just to show there were lots of them. But there's one thing you have to do, and we're going to highlight Orla Dunn's name in red because it came up so many times. I think we have to acknowledge Orla's outstanding success. Now, the legacy of Breath. Well, we have established the research hub. We've trained actually more young researchers than we initially set out to, and they're still within the region, and they're mostly within the region, a few of them outside, but they're working in academia and industry, and they continue to contribute and impact upon the region. And that was a very important goal of Breath, and that has been successful. I've mentioned the impact of research publications, which we will anticipate will increase over the coming years. Outreach has increased the awareness of COPD within the region. There are some invention disclosures, which I'll come back to in a moment. And there's a new clinical network set up, and I'll come back to that in a moment as well. So these things, a few more words about those particular things there. So the outreach, John will talk more about that, but it will be continuing. And actually, just in the last few weeks, we have been holding discussions within DKT about how to continue this. And Breed Delahunt, who's a lecturer in the School of Health and Science, she has a whole group of students in their final year, BSc honours students. 30 of those students, in the past, they always go out to schools as part of a project that they do. And she now wants to make this, focus this now on COPD. So we'll develop a programme. This will be at John's programme has been with primary schools. This will be at secondary school level and transition year level. So we're looking forward to continuing our public outreach through that outlet. There have been 5 invention disclosures. I'm not going to go into the details of them all, but they include new compounds that have been synthesized and new peptides and small molecules that have active effects on ion channels. So they're going to be, at the very least, if not used therapeutically to treat COPD, which is a big ask, obviously, but they will certainly be useful tools for scientists to study ion channels that are important for COPD. A clinical network has been set up in the west of Scotland, but headed by Professor Lorcan McGarvey, also in Queen's University. And this is for sample collection and processing, and this will continue after the funding for Breath ends. So Breath will continue after June. There are also some other affiliates, some of whom are here. These are people that weren't originally PIs on Breath, but have now affiliated to Breath through collaborations. Finally, I'd like to thank some people. First of all, I'd like to start by thanking my partners in UWS and QUB, particularly Lorraine and John. When we set out to apply for INTERREG, we got an external consultant, and he said, you know, this will be very stressful. Do you really need the money? And then he told us that his previous experience was that a married couple had actually got divorced on a previous project. Well, I have to say that I'm not going to divorce either Lorraine or John, you know, because we've had a really, really easy working relationship, and we look forward to that continuing. I'd like to thank SEUPB as well. I mean, there's so many people in SEUPB that should be thanked, some of whom I never met, but I know work behind the scenes. But particularly Paul Boylan and Elaine Farmer, who we had lots of interaction with. We found them very helpful, very easy to work with, and very much deserving of our appreciation. And then the External Advisory Committee, they met once a year. We would tell them what we were up to, and they would give us some feedback, and that was very helpful. I'd like to thank all of them, and Iggy McGowan is the chair of that, and I believe he's here today. I haven't actually run into him yet. Yes, there you are. Okay. And then finally, I'd like to acknowledge all the administrative support that we've had on breath. There's been so many people. Even that list is not actually it doesn't include everyone, but I really want to single out Bronwyn Lennon, who has been the project coordinator on Breath and has organised the event today and has been very, very helpful. But like I say, all the people on the list are deserving of our appreciation. So thank you.